I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we bring you the latest news from the Frontlines, analyse the new British Foreign Secretary's visit to Kyiv, and we interview GP Now, a web-based virtual clinic joining Ukrainian doctors and medical professionals to Ukrainians inside the country and around the world.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
If we give President Zelensky the tools, the Ukrainians will finish the job. Slava Ukraini!
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Thursday, the 16th of November, 1 year and 265 days since the full-scale invasion began. And joining me today are Associate Editor Dominic Nichols, foreign reporters Maiden Nanu and Verity Bowman, and our guests are Rob Hicken, Head of GP Now, and for the first time, Spencer Cash, Senior Emergency Response Strategist. I started by asking Dom for the latest news from Ukraine.
Hi David, hi everybody. So let's start in the east of Ukraine, around Avdiivka. The mayor there says that Russia has stepped up its attacks. This is, as we've been reporting for a while now, Ukraine has said that they're anticipating the third wave of Russian attacks on Avdiivka. I mean, there's been near constant military activity there, but the third big push has been anticipated for a while. And Mayor Vitaly Barabash has spoken on national television. He said, "It's very hot. Indeed, in the last few days, the enemy has become more active. We think in this push, as before, Russian troops are continuing to use armoured vehicles. They are targeting the industrial zone, and that's to the north of the main town itself, and hitting positions in the town, striking high-rise buildings, civilian areas," Mr. Barabash has said. It chimes with today's British Defence Intelligence update that says the recent advances have likely brought Russian forces close to the coke and chemical plant. That is a very large industrial complex producing a variety of chemicals, coke as well, coke included. That's to the north of the town. It does occupy a key tactical position to the north of the town. It dominates the main road from Avdiivka out to the northwest. If Russian forces were to secure it, this is British Defence Intelligence assessment, if Russian forces were to secure it, resupplying the town would become increasingly difficult. However, they go on to say the industrial facility provides Ukraine with a localised defence advantage, as in it's a built-up area. It's very difficult to take those kind of areas. Doesn't mean you can't smash it up so that it doesn't function, but it's difficult to get the defenders out of there. And British Defence Intelligence continue. They say, it provides a localised defence advantage, and Russian forces will probably suffer significant personnel losses if they attempt to assault the facility. I mean, they have already taken very significant personnel and equipment losses in their effort to take the town. So nothing so far to suggest they're not going to continue their much attempted up and atom lads running at Ukrainian guns without much coordination between the various military capabilities they have. Next, down to Kherson, and in a televised briefing, Natalia Hamenyuk, who's the spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Military Command, she described the front line there in the south as fairly fluid and said Kyiv's forces have been putting Russian troops under pressure along the length of the Dnipro River. She said the pushback from our side is taking place on a line between 2 to 5 miles along the entire bank from the water's edge. Now, that sounds a bit specific, but it's not really. We know a lot of the military activity there lately has been around the town of Kyiv, which is about 30 k's due east of Kherson. It's across the river, about 4 k's across the river. There has been geolocated footage in the last few days that suggests Ukrainian forces have pushed out of the town and have been active elsewhere along the bank. We know Russian forces for the first time, yesterday or the day before, they actually acknowledged that there was a Ukrainian force that had got a foothold there. This comes after weeks of saying they hadn't. There was nothing there, which is palpable nonsense. Anyway, so we'll continue to keep an eye on there. Ms. Hemenu also, she carried on, she said, "For now, we ask for informational silence, which would allow us to report later on great successes." I mean, informational silence, that's not particularly hard because we don't really know what's going on. We're trying to report what we can see from trusted open source areas. but we don't really have a firm idea of the strength of any of these reported armoured vehicles that have got across, and therefore whether or not that constitutes any ability whatsoever to continue to push on. But yeah, she wants room to report later great successes. Fair enough. Now, staying in the south, a Russian strike of at least 3 missiles in half an hour killed 2 emergency workers, wounded other civilians in the Zaporizhia region yesterday. So the emergency workers had responded to an initial blast and were killed as they put a fire out from an attack that took place only minutes earlier. That's according to Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko via Telegram. And Regional Governor Yuri Malashko said that civilian areas had been hit, but gave no further details of casualties there. Just finally from me, the European Union looks like it is going to ban the export of precision machine tools and key weapons manufacturing equipment components to Russia. This is reporting from ISW, the Institute for the Study of War. Now, that ban, they say, if enacted and effectively enforced, and the two don't always go hand in hand, they could deal a significant blow to Russia's defence industrial base, given the importance of precision tooling in industrial manufacturing. So Bloomberg reported yesterday that the EU's 12th sanctions package proposed a ban on the export of these things, the precision tools and the machinery parts used to make weapons, ammunition, used in welding machines, lithium batteries, thermostats, motors, drones, etc. ISW cite BNE IntelliNews, which was previously known as Business News Europe, a business media company focusing on emerging markets. They're now known as BNE IntelliNews. They previously reported Russia's near total reliance on European and US-produced precision machine tools that makes Moscow particularly vulnerable to these kind of sanctions. And in one of their older articles, it's going back a bit, but it's in 2021, they say Russia, up to that point, and I don't think this has changed much from what I could find out, they said Russia imports almost all the precision machines it requires. Now, we have reported before that Russia has been increasingly attempting to develop its own domestic solutions for sourcing what had been Western-made precision machine tools, certainly since the start of the full-scale invasion, likely in preparation for these sanctions packages that they would have anticipated, directly targeting this vulnerability. The Russian government approved in May earlier this year what they called the concept of technological development until 2030. Now, that plan encourages domestic production of high-tech products such as precision machine tools, and it mandates that domestic enterprises produce at least 75% of Russia's high-tech products by 2030. That is a tall order in anyone's book. Now, Russian state-owned defence conglomerate Rostec reported in August this year that the Stan Group, Russia's Stan Group, that's the country's largest domestic precision machine manufacturer, that Rostec purchased in 2019. They said it's a major element of Russia's what they call import substitution program, i.e. trying to make up for the lack of know-how and sophisticated components that they're bringing in. Last month, a chap called Semyon Yabukov, who's the head of the Rostec subsidiary, a Rostec subsidiary, he told Kommersant, that's a Russian politics and business paper, that Rostec hopes to use this Stan Group to meet Russia's great need, as he describes it, for precision machines in the absence of Western imports. Mr. Yakubov said Western sanctions and the war in Ukraine have sharply increased Russia's military and civilian demand for domestically produced machine tools, which I think we already knew, but it's good to have that confirmed. And Mr. Yabukov said Stan was unable to meet even a third of the total volume of Russia's orders for precision machines in 2023, estimated to be worth about 6 billion rubles, that's nearly $70 million. So 6 big B billion rubles, $70 million, US dollars. And that Russia's demand for precision machines is much greater, his words, than its current production abilities. I'll come back to that in my final thought, the implications there and what this means. But we need to pay increasing attention to what's happening on the sanctions front and the defence industrial base. But I'll take a pause there, David.
Thank you very much, Dom. Maiden Nanu, as our foreign reporter, can I come to you? You've been running the Ukraine live blog today. There are two fairly chunky stories I think we should get into. First of all, Britain's new foreign secretary is in Ukraine. Can you tell us about this?
Hi, David. So today Lord Cameron made his first visit to Ukraine. Well, we believe he actually arrived yesterday, and details of the trip were kept under wraps. But he visited Volodymyr Zelensky at the presidential palace in Kyiv, and the pair had what appeared to be a very good meeting. He told Zelensky essentially that Britain will continue to support Ukraine, whatever it takes. And he said, we will continue to give you the moral support, the diplomatic support, and the economic support, but above all, the military support for however long it takes. And Zelensky essentially voiced concern, or alluded to concern, that global attention has shifted to what's happening in the Middle East. And he said the world isn't focused on the situation on our battlefield in Ukraine. And he said that dividing the focus really does not help. And I think Cameron's language was very reassuring. And later, the Foreign Office put out a statement in which he said, Russia thinks it can wait this war out and that the West will eventually turn its attention elsewhere. And he said that this could not be further from the truth. And also he made reference to Boris Johnson. He said that he's had some disagreements with his friend Boris Johnson, but he said that Johnson's support for Ukraine was the finest thing that he and his government did.
Well, thank you very much, Maina. Let's move to the US. There's some slightly less good news, it seems, coming out of the US. Talk us through this story.
Yes, so yesterday, John Kirby, who, as you'll know, is the White House national security spokesman, essentially warned that the US could be nearing the end of the road on its support for Ukraine if it doesn't get more funding. And he said the US could soon lose the ability to support Ukraine's defences without approval for more US military assistance from Congress. He said they're coming near the end of the road, and Ukraine continues to be involved in an active, dynamic fight all along that front. And he says that our ability to continue to support Ukraine is increasingly at jeopardy if we don't get the supplemental funding. And now this actually ties in quite well with a story from our US editor, Tony Diver, who had a report yesterday that Ukrainian cities will be vulnerable to Russian missile attacks this winter unless this funding is approved by Congress in the coming weeks. And just as a reminder, Joe Biden's request for a $60 billion package for Ukraine was removed on Monday from a spending resolution in the House of Representatives. And so this means there's potentially many more weeks of delays before the next tranche of funding can be released.
Thank you very much, Maiden Verity. Can I come to you? You've been looking at a very interesting story about, well, the quote is highly likely, end quote, Russian war crimes. Can you tell us about this?
Yes, hello David and everyone listening. So a team of international lawyers found that Russia is highly likely to be guilty of war crimes, following what it called a systematic weaponization of Ukrainian grain supplies. The investigation, as I said, was launched by a human rights firm, and they're called Global Rights Compliance. They've done a lot researching humanitarian issues in Ukraine. So they found that since the beginning of the war, a Kremlin-linked network of grain extraction has been methodically built up in eastern Ukraine. They say it points towards a carefully planned campaign of what they call a criminal nature. They said that Russia used large carrier ships purchased before the war to transport grain, seized train tracks and local means of storage, and set up shipping operations in Ukrainian port facilities to export products into Russia. I spoke to Katriona Murdoch, who is the lead of GRC's Starvation Mobile Justice Team, and she told me that in all of their research, they haven't seen anything so systematic or sophisticated in terms of scale until now. I think a lot of the context is quite important here for those listening. It comes against the backdrop of severe disruption of Ukrainian grain exports due to the war. We've spoken a lot before about how Russian blockades have caused prices to soar and contributed to a global food security crisis. And if we go back to the report, many of you might be wondering where this information has come from and how the lawyers were able to prove that such a system exists. So the report analysed open sources comprising of information including photographs, videos, public statements by officials and other digital data. I'll now add a little bit more detail from the report for you. It found that upon invasion, Russia seized grain facilities from Ukrainian corporations and private farmers, and that they consolidated control through the Russian-affiliated civil administration of these facilities. The Kremlin then invested in networks to transport the grain, including roads, rail, and ports. They say that a lot of the grain extraction occurred in Luhansk and Zaporizhia. One of the main parts of the report was that 3 170-metre grain carrier ships were pre-purchased by a Russian defence contractor before the war. They then said that multiple convoys were seen carrying grain towards Crimea, while GPS trackers on vehicles stolen from farmers showed that they were actually driving into Russia via Crimea. As I said earlier, rail networks were also used, but barges were also loaded with supplies from Zaporizhia, and their potential destinations were in Russia and Crimea. Another final bit of evidence that they found, which I thought was quite interesting, were that job adverts were posted to Telegraph by Russian logistic companies, and they were analysed by investigators. These posts show that Russia just couldn't get enough drivers in time to transport the vast quantities of stolen Ukrainian grain to Russia. When I interviewed the experts from Global Rights Compliance, they said that all of this was part of a concerted plan to both weaken the livelihoods of many Ukrainians and also place some political pressure on world leaders in relation to food shortages in vulnerable countries, like those in the Horn of Africa. Again, here I'll add a little bit more context because it's important to explain the link between Russian actions and global food shortages. As I said earlier, Russian blockades of Black Sea ports have left global supplies insecure, and they've reduced Ukraine's ability to export grain to those most vulnerable. We saw that the Black Sea Grain Initiative marked an attempt to reintroduce exports from Ukraine to the global market. But this actually expired in July 2023 after Russia unilaterally refused to extend its term. Overall, the main point here is that Global Rights Compliance said that Russia's ability to control grain has given them a trump card in being able to bring people to the negotiating table. And overall, the systematic planning has really helped contribute to havoc on a global scale.
Thank you very much, Verity, for that report. And thank you very much, Verity and Maidner, for making the time to join us today. Now, let's turn to our guests. Today, we're joined for an update by the team behind GP Now, a web-based virtual clinic, joining Ukrainian doctors and medical professionals to Ukrainians inside the country, including, crucially, the occupied areas and around the world. GP Now has specialists including psychologists, paediatricians located around the world, available 24/7 who can speak those seeking help in their native language. So welcome back Rob Hicken, head of GP Now, and for the first time Spencer Cash, senior emergency response strategist. Rob and Spencer, thank you so much for joining us. Could you just explain a little bit more about your work, what you do day to day and some of the challenges you face?
Thank you, David, and Dom and Team Telegraph for having us back. Yeah, so we established our telehealth service GP Now back in March last year. We did testing. We were backed by Amazon Web Services, and we launched the platform at the start of March last year. We built our hospital in the cloud, as a term that Dom kindly coined, consists of 75 certified Ukrainian medical professionals. 12 are in Ukraine, and the rest are spread across Europe mainly, and unable to practice outside of the country. We've been able to, thanks to Dr. Vadim Ilyashenko, who's our chief medical officer at the Oberig Clinic in Kyiv, build a very eclectic selection of primary care providers, general practitioners, family practitioners, right through to a lot of very deep specialist type skills, and the team workers to provide that continuum of care for patients. Our patients are all Ukrainian. About 60% are outside of Ukraine displaced, and 40% are in Ukraine. And about 25% of those are actually behind the enemy lines, so to speak. We've provided 2,500 hours of uninterrupted service since we went live. And really three things, David, we do provide. First of all is we do have the best of the best in terms of the Ukrainian doctors that we've assembled. And most of them are mums with unable to practice in the countries where they've been relocated to. and it's all going pretty well. We do have some obviously psychologists, pediatricians, oncologists, and we even have a veterinarian on the platform, and it's working beautifully. And I just wanted to thank the Ukraine the Latest audience, because we're completely this year we've had to completely self-fund, and we've been able to help just over 10,000 families around the world, and we've done 15,000 sessions. And sorry, the point I was trying to make about the comfort and care comes from Ukrainian citizens. We all forget, I guess we assume once you leave the country and you're safe, that life is going to be okay, but it's still very, very difficult for Ukrainian citizens, families in countries where Ukrainian isn't spoken, to be able to articulate medical issues, whether they're really simple primary care issues or have a deep and meaningful psychological session with one of our psychologists. So yeah, thanks to Ukraine the Latest, we continue to make a difference.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for that overview there. Spencer, can I come to you? You've recently got back, as I understand it, from a trip to Ukraine, travelling across the country, west to east, visiting previously occupied territories, northeast of Kyiv and Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, and out to the east of Kharkiv. Can you tell us about your time out there? What did you see? What impression did it leave on you? And what did you learn?
Dom, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with your audience today. And I'd like to start by sharing, those who truly understand the brutality of war are the ones who experience it through trauma. And in my life, I've been fortunate to survive many traumatic events, serving in the military, and now going into Ukraine and experiencing what that challenge and reality is for those that live there. And one of the reasons why I'm able to function normally in society today is because of the wonderful care I receive from my psychotherapist, and it really is great sense of humor. I'll share a story about Alyssa, who was one of my guides in Ukraine. She and her father-in-law gave me a tour of Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Borodenka, and their village, a small village where they lived under occupation for 10 days and escaped. And it starts with my support and involvement with Ukraine. And early on, I helped a charity transport 1,800 tourniquets and other medical supplies from San Diego to Poland, where those were transferred over to Ukrainians who moved them into the country. But in Krakow, Poland, I met Alyssa, and she had just been pulled out of the country. And this was day 38 of the war, by her father, who went in to go get her. Alyssa was engaged to a Ukrainian, at the time was engaged to a Ukrainian. And her experience is through the now in-laws that cared and helped her to escape from the north of Kyiv to the family farm in the area of Borodenka, a real small village that they live in. And I share that because I want to try to explain that when I connected with Alyssa, she had just left, and she understood that I had a background in military service and medical evacuation in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she felt comfortable enough to share with me her experience in war. And I was the first outsider to listen and understand her story outside of her family support system. She revealed her story to me as someone who could truly understand her experience and provide meaningful support and words of comfort. And after listening to the story about how the one street village of maybe 50 or 75 homes was occupied, and shelled by the Russians. and and what that experience was, I came to understand that after 5 wars that I've participated in with the military, that her experience of being shelled was far greater than any experience I had had in having a few rockets shot into the base in, say, Iraq or Afghanistan. And I could see it in her eyes, and I could hear it in her voice that she had gone through trauma that was significantly worse than any experience that I had previously. It's something that we who have been and experienced war have a shared bond or understanding. It for me to see that from a young Alyssa was in her young, or she's 20 something years old, life full ahead of her, and to see how she shared and explained her experience and the trauma that came with it was tremendous in the impact upon me. And this was day 38. I didn't go into Ukraine until much later and just recently. And I met back up with Alyssa and her now father. She married the young Ukrainian man and had a baby during that time. And I met back up with them, and they took me on a tour and shared how they were able to escape with a 10 vehicle convoy of the family to the family farm, for lack of, or country house, so to say, in an area where they thought that they would be safe, and it turned out that it wasn't safe, and they were surrounded. We visited those areas, and I couldn't believe the scale and scope of the destruction that I saw. It's unlike anything else that I had experienced in my life or in my war experiences, and it was truly eye-opening and shocking. You see it on the pictures or on the news and video, but you can't understand the grasp and the scale of it until you get there in person and someone explains exactly what happened. And some of what I saw was rebuilding and reconstruction. One of the points that struck with me is Victor. He's a Ukrainian. That's the father-in-law of Alyssa. He was the driver for us, and sharing through his language and it being translated directly to me. After we visited the family farm and they showed me the location where they hid in the root cellar from the artillery and all the other challenges that brought, that they were able to escape one day before the village was fully occupied. And I didn't understand until we drove out, and Victor across the street from his house pointed to another house and said, "That's where my uncle lived. He was killed and executed in his front yard." And these are the traumatic experiences that Ukrainians had to have dealt with and deal with as part of the Russian full-scale invasion into the country. And there are many others who are living in occupied territory, unable to escape, like Alyssa or Victor. And what they face is a life or a challenge of maintaining their Ukrainian identity while being controlled, dominated, oppressed by the Russian state. As we understand that Russia follows a doctrine of unrestricted warfare, and what that means is that there are no rules and there's nothing forbidden. And we see the state apparatus efforts with banks being forced to report customers using VPN, or Ukrainian POW conscripts or POWs being conscripted to fight on the side of Russia. And for the Ukrainian civilians living in occupied territory, they are forced to forfeit their citizenship and assimilate into the Russian apparatus in order to access basic necessities such as healthcare or other services.
Spencer, hi, it's Dom here. I wonder if I could just cut in there. It's really interesting the bit that you were describing, the landscape you were describing, and you were coming on to there, I think, something of critical importance to this conversation, particularly with GP Now. There are reports, as you're saying now, that those Ukrainians in the occupied areas are having to renounce their citizenship and take Russian citizenship in order to access basic services, including healthcare. So could you describe for us, please, and Rob, if you're able to as well, what have GP Now been able to do there? I'm conscious of the security angle to this, as we previously discussed, so don't go over the line, but what are GP Now able to do in that environment for Ukrainians who do not want to renounce their citizenship but do need access to health and medical services?
Well, I would just share before I toss the majority of the answer over to Rob on that, is that GP Now provides an alternative to forfeiture of Ukrainian citizenship in order to access medical services. And they are employing Ukrainian clinicians living under occupation, and also providing care to Ukrainians who are trapped behind enemy lines. And Rob, I think you can pick it up from here and further detail that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Spencer and Dom. Yeah, so the technology itself is super secure because we use point-to-point technology, which allows us to go into remote regions such as a war zone, and so we are able to connect to. We estimate our statistics for the country as a whole. We estimate roughly 10% are on the other side of either previously occupied or occupied territory, and we are providing some primary care, but most of it probably is psychological services and support, and just being able to talk to a doctor without having to. It's pretty serious stuff, that side. And one of our friends' mothers, she's in Zaporizhzhia, and we were able to give her the medical advice that she needed, that without her obviously having to give up her citizenship and all the other crazy stuff that's going on.
Thanks. And just one more for me, if I may. We've spoken before, and you've described the difficulty you have docking with the Ukrainian health system. You don't have an advocate in the country. You're not part of the established infrastructure there. So making that work, and the funding and getting the message out and rolling the service out, you've described as problematic. Why are you not able to dock with the state apparatus?
It's certainly not for lack of trying, Dom. We're blessed to have the support of two wonderful Ukrainian ambassadors, Ambassador Hyman to Indonesia, and Ambassador Miroshnichenko in Australia. He's incredible. We are part of the Amazon Web Services Project Sunflower, and we have briefed President Zelensky. And we have reached out to Yaroslav Agress, who facilitates United 24 on his behalf. And we've also spoken with Ministry of Health. The truth is, after 18 months, we have just not, and that's where we believe this should reside. Now that it's certainly proven and it works, and we've spoken to so many people, and we just can't get the backing and support since, other than Ukraine, the latest. We did talk to Direct Relief in the United States, Dean Axelrod, the VP, about partnering with traditional NGOs, and his comment to us was, Rob, it works. Your strength is it works, and we're fitting in this new niche, a bit like drones are to tanks today. We are to delivering medical and humanitarian aid. But he said our problem partnering with an organization like yours is you're not in country. So we're going round in circles. We had a wonderful call with Medical Bridges as well in the United States. a lot of people are still working out how to take what we've done and scale it. And we know, Dom, that we can scale. We're helping,
And
we know we can help 1,000 families a month. We know we can go to 10,000, but we are completely stretched. We've raised, we pay our doctors €10 to be online. They're refugees themselves. We haven't, last year when we were fully funded by Amazon, every month on month, the service increased. And we don't advertise. I get 5 to 10 to 15 patients a day registering every day, purely on word of mouth. And it's a real struggle. This is a self-funded war, and we certainly don't have a lot of experience with raising funds. And so every month we're putting all our energy into fighting to find funding. And with the events, the recent events with the world looking elsewhere right now, last month was a disaster, and we weren't able to pay our doctors on the 1st of November. It's after 3 consecutive months of paying them. So we're desperate for help. We're hoping somewhere out there is a philanthropic person or a Ukrainian connected business that would get behind us and bankroll us. We only need $10,000 a month to cover all our costs. 100%, 20% goes to covering the platform costs, and 80% goes to the clinical care team. And they're all predominantly women. Gina on the border in Romania, Tanya and Evgenia in Hungary and Germany, and then the incredible doctors. We just have to we're fighting every month to stay alive. And I really want to thank the Ukraine latest audience, because without you, over 50% of what we've raised this year, we would have folded in June. And it'd be a shame, because if we do, it would be like we were never there. And those 10,000 families are real. I'm glad to say, Anastasia, the young girl I mentioned before in a previous call who had chondral chordoma, the life-threatening throat and neck cancer, is still doing really, really well. We helped a young girl a refugee in Indonesia, but we need help.
Let me just quick jump in and share with the audience some of the core competencies of GP Now that I've been able to understand and witness. And first, GP Now has the lowest cost for all crisis care medical delivery systems, providing free clinical care to globally displaced Ukrainians and those living under occupation. Next, GP Now leverages displaced Ukrainian clinicians unable to practice medicine in their location and employs them to provide crisis care through the hospital in the cloud, directly to displaced Ukrainians, achieving a cultural synergy and trust between the patient and practitioner, which is the ideal. No other NGO extends the continuum of care to Ukrainians trapped behind enemy lines and employs Ukrainian clinicians living under occupation while reaching a global global diaspora of refugees. And lastly, GP Now demonstrates transparency by routinely publishing the results of their care provided, and clearly articulates how donor funds are dispersed to care providers. These are important factors in understanding what the capabilities GP Now provides to those doctors or clinicians and patients. And I would say that those that are living and working and operating under occupation, both the patient and the practitioner face great risk, but the reward of the outcome is worth it.
Well, thank you both of you for your contributions today. Let's move, I think, to our final thoughts, unless Dom has any more questions. If not, Dom Nichols, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to return briefly to what we were speaking earlier on, the issue of the European Union looking as if they're going to ban the export of precision machine tools and key weapons manufacturing equipment components to Russia. I think this is important because I think the war is now very much into the industrial phase. And what I mean by that is it's into the phase where who can build up enough stuff of the required quality quickly enough, and this is the hard bit, decide whether or not to expend that resource in a series of small offensives to keep the pressure on the enemy, look for opportunities to break through, shore up domestic international morale, etc., etc.? Or do they keep the powder dry, build up a much larger force, and come back in a few months' time with a much more capable military force? So I think that's where we are at the moment. It's very much a political decision more than a military one, especially for President Zelensky now, with any inaction at the front being interpreted either willfully or through ignorance as stalemate. And some are saying there's no proof, or this is proof rather, that there's no chance of defeating Russia. All nonsense, in my opinion. But there is pressure on Ukraine to do something, particularly with the clock ticking down to the US presidential election next year. I think it's going to take a concerted political effort for Ukraine to continue to make the case for support and to win the argument if they choose to essentially do no major advances in for quite a number of months, to win that argument and say that it's worth holding on for something bigger next year. But it is a very real concern, and so the defence industrial side of this war is really going to come into the fore, I think, now and over the next few months, because I think things are going to slow down, certainly on land. I mean, war, of course, is much bigger than land. Look at what's happening in the Black Sea and inside Russia and internationally. So that's why I think it is wrong to characterise the ending of Ukraine's counteroffensive as a stalemate. There's a huge number of moving parts to this, but one that's coming absolutely to the front now is the defence industrial base and what it means. And I look at this in more detail in today's Defence in Depth film, or this week's Defence in Depth film. It's be out on YouTube in about 4 or 5 hours-ish. But I look at what the apparent end of the Ukrainian counteroffensive means and how it fits into what the direction of the wider war. But I think it all comes down to the news that we're seeing today potentially out of the European Union. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dom. Spencer and Rich, would you like to share your very brief final thoughts, please?
Yeah, sorry, this is Spencer. I'd just like to share and hit that thank you to all the audience and the listeners. And as Rob explained, that roughly for the past 8 months, that it's the individual listeners who's helped to fund and keep this service going. And as we finish with Veterans Day, Armistice Day, Remembrance Day, and in America move into Thanksgiving, a time where we focus on family and caring, I would ask those that are out making preparations for their family meals and their time with their loved ones, that they think about others who don't have that opportunity and need that medical and mental help to continue and hope to keep going and living and striving and moving forward and making good advances in their life and caring for those that are their children. And once again, it is because of those individuals in your audience who have the kindness of heart to give and support, whether it be $10 or $100. It all makes a difference, and we thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Spencer. Rob, would you like the very final words?
Thanks, David, and thanks everybody for your continued support. Yeah, just in closing, two important dates coming up. Saturday week is the 90th anniversary of the Holodomor, and here we are 90 years later, and we're still dealing with massive humanitarian issues. I appeal to the Ukrainian diaspora out there, the Ukrainians who are in a position to help us help the great people of Ukraine through these troubled times. Please consider supporting us. And the other major event coming up is 1st of December, which is the beginning of winter. And with the winter, the darkness will come the darkness. So please, I know you'll be putting our details in the description. Just wishing everybody in America happy Thanksgiving for the upcoming period. And God bless Team Telegraph, and Slava Ukraini.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on Twitter so you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine the latest as soon as it is released, do refer to the podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the latest on your preferred podcast app. And, if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message, and you can contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our Twitter handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we are especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was produced by Giles Gear, and the executive producers are David Knowles and Louisa Wells.